Okay, good morning to everybody. Okay, we are in the home stretch, and Justin isn't back yet. We're in the home stretch, and this is what, the 9? Week 8? You sure it's week 8? No, it's week 9. Can't be week 8. It's the end of October, basically. It's 13 weeks, semester is 13 weeks. And semester finishes the third week in November. So if this is week 8, you're saying we're going into the beginning of exams begin the first week in December. Right. So we only have basically next week, and 2 weeks, because we finish, so we got 3 weeks actually. I'd like to give you a week before the official break that you can start beginning your preparation. And we basically finish all of the topics that are necessary, the important ones in going in, preparing for the exam. So the only other thing we would look at, which is not a new topic, but I'm going to give you, I'll put it up online during the weekend, but we'll look at financial ratio analysis, and I'm going to give you, thank you. So what I'll do, I'll give you a copy of a statement looking at different financial ratios, and I want you to prepare those ratios. We'll have an in-class discussion showing you how to go about doing the ratio analysis as would be required under exam conditions. So other than that, we have covered all of the critical topics necessary for the exam. All that is necessary now, what we're going to do in lecture and in tutorials is basically practicing how to interpret the various tools and matrices, how to apply them, and how to analyze them. That's what we're going to be doing. So in fact, these sessions now are going to be the most critical working sessions in preparing for exams. So I realize there are a lot of people preparing for the midterms, but it's not a good time to be missing class because we get into a lot of critical stuff, analyzing how to analyze, how to interpret your matrices. And even today's session, when we look at globalization and strategy going into global markets, you would see that nearly all of the concepts we had from week 1 right up until last week, a lot of those concepts are going to be coming up. So the way we're going to do it today is interactive. As we look at the slides, I want you to indicate to me which tool could be used to analyze a particular area, right? What concepts, what kind of strategies are being mentioned? Are there the integration strategies? Are there intensive strategies? Is it differentiation? Is it about value chain, business model? So we are going to be actually testing your knowledge in preparing you to be ready for the exam and the conditions and what you should know and what things you should understand in going into the exam, right? So I want to urge you folks, as I said, participation and getting involved in discussions will be very important in preparing yourselves for the exam. As I want to repeat, I've been repeating it throughout the semester, this is not a road exam where you just read up and go in the exam, because the exam is not the traditional essay type. It is really about analysis and a kind of a mini case. So you're really looking at case scenarios and interpreting those case scenarios. So I just want to remind you and bring those things to your attention. Good morning, ladies. So again, we're also going to look at a couple of videos which look at global strategy. So your role, again, we look at these videos and then you identify the different types of strategy, the different types of concepts that were utilized in the videos. So the first is a thought by Alain Gomez: you do not choose to become global, the market chooses for you, it forces your hand. Right? So as they say, the world is global, there's competition coming from all around, so the goal of a company is to survive and to be sustainable. So if you find that there's competition coming into your country, in some cases, you don't have much of a choice than to go out. So if you look at Grace Kennedy, if you look at the Massey, if you look at McAlson, if you look at Goddard's companies and many Caribbean companies, they're actually seeking to move beyond their immediate land space and beyond the Caribbean. Sagicor, which is, again is a regional company, and nearly all of them are seeking to move global because of the pressures from other countries. So this looks at why the world is globalizing, and it gives a number of reasons. Closed national economies, they are opening up markets, they are allowing foreign trade, and the issue of geographic distance with the technology and internet makes it easy for people to do business. Right? So can somebody give me one example of how technology allows people to do business easily? What are some of the things that we take for granted? What's that? To do business. E-commerce, meaning that you can purchase and pay. I can buy something from China. I can use PayPal, I can use my credit card. So it means that you can purchase, and not only purchase, you can have it delivered. Right? Right? So we call that, the technical term for that type of business using e-commerce is, it is click. Right. Click, which is part of the new business model. So it's using click, part of the new business model. So here's the motivation, a number of reasons what motivates people to go global. And it says getting access, new access to customers, gain access to natural resources, lower costs, capitalize on resource strength and competencies, and spread business risks across wider market areas. Now, embedded in these 5 points are some critical concepts we have dealt with over the past week. Anybody can identify? Yes, Justin? With first one, gain access to new markets. Market development, not penetration. Why is it not penetration? Right, and this is global, means that you're taking new markets in other range. So this is really a market development strategy. And obtain access to valuable natural resources. That relates to, I didn't hear you. Sorry? Well, just eventually when you get it, but what concept deals with the issue of natural resources? The space, white space matrix. It says obtain access to natural resources. What are we talking about here? Raw material. So what we're talking about here, what's the technical term? Value chain and inbound logistics. Sources of supply. This is sources of supply, folks. So natural resources is just another form of supply. It's the value chain, sources of supply, or inbound logistics. That's what you're talking about there. Help achieve lower costs. What can help us understand this? Help achieve lower costs, right in the back. Lady right here. This speaks to help achieve lower costs, value chain analysis. What else? Porter's 5 generic strategies, which speaks to cost leadership. Excellent. It's a cost leadership strategy under Porter's 5 generic strategies. Now, if you knew that, you are on the ball. If you didn't, you're in trouble. So if you didn't know that, you're really in trouble at this point, because you should know that at this time. Capitalize on resource strengths and competencies. That relates to RBV. Who said that? You're on target. Correct. And RBV, everybody knows, relates to the resource-based view, which says that internal resources are more important for what? You haven't finished it yet. More important for what? Correct. So folks, if you wrote that in the exam, you give away marks. It is not only that internal resources are more important, but internal resources are more important in order to gain a competitive advantage. And you must add that. But excellent again, it speaks to the resource-based view because it talks about the strengths and competencies. What tells you that is an internal factor in this statement? The strengths, right? Because we know strengths relate to the internal part of the SWOT. That's impressive so far, folks. Spread business risk across a wider market base. Spread business risk across a wide market base. Which one is that? That relates to which strategy? Come on, folks. What that relates to? That relates to. Sorry? Diversification. It could be diversification. It could mean that. What else? Sorry? It could relate to defensive. Yeah, it could relate to a defensive strategy also. What else could it relate to? Say spread business risk across a wider market base. What does the wider market base relate to? Sorry? Is it market penetration? Remember, this is about globalization and business. Right. So you're spreading the business risk because you're going to another. Right. So you see, even within these motivations to go internationally, it speaks to some significant concepts relating to strategy, value chain, and tools, etc. And that's what you're going to be seeing throughout this presentation. Now, the other thing we need to distinguish for this morning is between what you call an international or multinational business versus a global one, right? So what it says the benchmark would be the international or multinational business or competitor operates in a few markets, but the benchmark is for the global competitor, as it says, markets products in 50 to 100 countries or 50 or more. And that's what separates international from global, just a sheer number. Right? So sometimes it speaks to the global versus the international, so we distinguish what a global strategy is versus an international strategy. So what might be some of the main challenges of a company going global? 50 or more countries. What might be some of the major challenges? Culture for sure, laws and regulations. What else? Sorry? Because because of expanding, but it can also be the opposite. If you go to China where wages are about 10 times less, is actually you benefit from reduced costs. Somebody said something earlier. Right? Benefits of technology. What else? Sorry? What about the HR? Right. Yeah, well, that could be a challenge, right? If you don't have the skills, but you could actually seek out countries where the skills are already, and then they offer cheaper wages, but they possess the skills, which is a cheaper option, which is what most global companies would try to do. That's why the Caribbean is so attractive. You know, the educational levels are pretty high and the wages are lower. So you come and set up here and do business, and you benefit from the skill of your HR, and you benefit also from the lower costs by wages. The wage structures are cheaper. And why are wages important? Why is it important for a company to pay attention to the wages in a country? Somebody right here, yellow. Why is it important for a country to pay attention to the wages of the country they're going to? Well, eventually, what other reason there could be that you pay attention to wages? That's it. You're trying to manage costs, and because you're trying to manage costs and keep costs down, you pay attention to the wage structure in each country. So you go for the country that has the lower wages with the best education or qualification levels, right? And these are some of the points you mentioned earlier: cultural differences, the issue of culture, different demographics. which could be age, gender, qualification levels, variations in manufacturing and distribution costs. What concepts are we speaking about here? Value chain, in that the distribution, which would be the outbound logistics, and manufacturing relates to operations or processing, right? So this speaks, that third line is just value chain issues you're talking about here. So there's actually a concept of a global value chain because you're operating in so many multiple places doing business. Fluctuating exchange rates relates to, could be financial ratios. What else could it relate to? Fluctuating exchange rates. Sorry? Right. But what concept in strategy does it relate to? What concept speaks to exchange rates? Economic. It can't be technology, it's economic. Right? It's part of the PEST model. That one of the things you do first in your external analysis, you look at the economic factor. And this really speaks to PEST analysis. So even if a country is going global, it must do a PEST analysis. Differences in host government trade policies relates to, that speaks for itself. The, right, political and legal, correct. So folks, I hope you realize what the point I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, when we get to this stage on your exam, you need to have a rounded knowledge in understanding what you're not going to get in the exam, what is PESTLE, what is SWOT, but it is expected and understood for you to really understand and do the exam well, you must understand PESTLE well. What are the components of PESTLE? What are the competitive factors? What is SWOT about? What are the components of a SWOT? What are the components of 5 forces? You're not going to get a question saying what are 5 forces element, but it is expected to do well in the exam. You understand how the 5 forces work, the elements of 5 forces, because in answering questions, you might have to speak to something related, maybe the bargaining power of the supplier or bargaining power of the consumer. So these are foundation concepts all students must know. So you can't spot, let me repeat, you cannot spot these concepts in the exam, right? Because there's not going to be any one question. All of these are foundation concepts, and I'll speak to all the concepts you need to know to go in the exam and do well. PEST analysis, SWOT analysis, 5 forces analysis, EFE, IFE, CPM, right? All of the integration strategies, backward, forward, all of the marketing, development, penetration strategies, you need to know all of those, defensive strategies, offensive strategies, 5 generic strategies, all of these you need to know going into the exam. So it's not that you can spot, but they're going to be coming across lines in all of the questions you're going to get. So they're just foundation things that you really, and value chain analysis is really compulsory. You need to know that exceptionally well. Primary value chain, secondary value chain, all the phrase, what are the key concepts in value chain you need to know? Inbound logistics, processing and outbound, and then what else? Sorry, primary and secondary, what else? The heart of value chain analysis then. Strategic cost analysis, cost advantages, cost disadvantages, and cost drivers. Those are fundamental concepts you need to know. The other point, consumer tastes and preferences, that differs country by country. Consumer buying habits, right? Market size and growth potential, distribution channels, driving forces, again, a whole set of concepts here. So consumer tastes and preferences will come where? What kind of concepts or tools can help you analyze these things? Consumer tastes and preferences. Sorry? Social cultural factors could be covered in the PESTLE too. What else? Customer tastes and preferences. Your marketing strategies would come up there. Sales and marketing, which is part of the value chain. And the value chain permeates, folks, nearly every single thing. Consumer buying habits. What tool will factor in consumer buying habits? Bargaining power of the consumer. You've got to pay attention to the bargaining power of the consumer, because that drives companies to determine the developed products, to lower or raise prices depending on the power levels. Market size and growth potential speaks to, could be market penetration, but in this global context, you're talking about market development, right? So when we talk about growth potential, how do you understand growth potential? Which matrix we dealt with speaks about growth potential? One of the matrices we dealt with last week spoke about growth potential. Which is it? And because the grand strategy speaks to, which axis deals with growth potential? X or Y? The Y, because the Y speaks to, it speaks to what? It speaks to, that's the space. She said the grand strategy matrix. So the grand strategy speaks to competitive position versus market, and on the y-axis it says, Justin, sorry? Rapid market growth versus slow market movements. I remember the chart we did the chart I did on the board that I told you need to go back to. That chart looked at, the chart I did looked at the, right, so the chart was called the chart that looked at the life cycle. Markets also have a life cycle. Distribution channels speak to value chain, again, forward distribution, the outbound logistics, and competitive pressures, rivalry among competing firms. So you realize, I said, folks, that even when you're talking about global business, one of the things you would have to analyze, how intense is the rivalry among competing firms? So potential location advantages stemming from cost variations. So folks, the point I want to note here, that the emphasis even in going global is on managing your costs. So once it is about managing your costs, it speaks directly to the issue of value chain management and value chain assessment. So if you look at here, the first one, manufacturing costs vary. Again, that's the operations or processing of the value chain. So again, we are particularly interested in it, and they talked about the same point I mentioned earlier, factors such as wage rates, worker productivity, are they very productive, the availability of resources, etc., inflation rates. So you can see even the gamut of pestle factors are also coming up here. Energy, which would be part of the environmental factor, tax rates, again, part of one of the economic factors. And then the final point, clustering of suppliers. Why is that important? Why is the clustering of suppliers important? Why is the focus on the clustering of suppliers important? Why do you think a global company would pay attention to that? Yes, sir. What do you think a global company would pay attention to clustering of suppliers? Sorry? Excellent. And why is that important for global business? Right, so why would it be important for you to look at the clusters of suppliers? It relates to bargaining power, but why? What do you want to identify? But he said bargaining power, which is the issue. Right, so what is the concern then about the clustering of suppliers? Go ahead. Right, are there a few suppliers controlling the supply market? So you're looking at the cluster. Is it a loose cluster? Is it a strong, small cluster? Where they have, your point is a very important point about the bargaining power of the supplier. Because if the supplier's got bargaining power and there are not a lot of cheap resources available locally, you might have cheap wages, but the cost of the supplies are so expensive. So that's the point they mentioned earlier about natural resource availability. So if suppliers have power and they're operating in powerful clusters, you have a problem. Because if they have the power, what can they do? They can push your prices up. They can push the prices up. And once the prices are pushed up, what's your challenge? Right? But before you raise prices, no. They push the price up for the supplies. What's my major concern first? That's correct. Follow the sequential step. They push the prices up. When I buy the resource, it increases my costs. And once it increases my operational costs, eventually, when I get the product to market, it's a greater probability that my prices are higher. But the first thing is their high prices would push my costs up. If I can get them to offer better prices and I keep my costs down, I can offer then better prices, lower prices for the same quality for the persons I'm selling my product to. Trade associations, makers of complementary products. What's the language we use for that? Substitute products, right? So again, we are talking about which tool here? Right, Porter's five forces model, where you're looking at complementary products. Are they substitutes? So as a global competitor, if I go to this market, are there a lot of complementary products which are not authentic, but people might buy them because they are much cheaper? So these are just another set of external factors. So this is just giving an example of multi-country competition. And remember, the multi-country is different to global. Multi-country means you're operating more in the international business. We'll look at the characteristics of the global later in the next slide. So this one says each country market is self-contained, meaning you could operate within that environment independently or autonomously, right? It's independent of competition from other markets. That's what it is saying. So I go in this particular country and I don't have to worry about competition, right? Because what I'm offering is such a unique product, other competitors in the international market might not be interested in coming to this particular country, right? And they say the rivals competing in one country market, differ from the set of rivals competing in others. So it says that once you go internationally to one country, you don't have to worry significantly about any intense competition. And then in terms of the characteristics of the global, they say the competitive conditions across country markets are strongly linked together. Okay? So he's saying in global market, there seems to be a higher rate of intense competition. And because of that, what are the concerns once there's intense competition? Once there's intense competition, what are the challenges that occur as a result of that? Sorry? The Sorry? But before lower profits. Right. Could be less sales. Hmm? Right. Well, the demand might still be high, but you might not be able to, it might not come your way. Because there's so many people, you see, the demand could be high. What? Right, you might not be able to get competitive advantage. You see, because demand is driven by whom? The consumer. So it could be great demand, but it's just there's so many competitors, you're fighting to gain a particular aspect of that market. So companies don't control demand unless, right, you're a monopoly basically. You're a monopoly, you put it out there, you're the only person producing it. So once you put it out there, so you can bring out all kinds of products because nobody is going to have something, and it's something you need. Once it's a high need, they can actually influence the direction of demand. And here are some strategies that we all should know: exporting, licensing, franchising, and then based on low cost differentiation, focusing on best cost. And we know that relates to Porter's 5 generic strategies. And strategic alliances and joint ventures, are they defensive or offensive? Strategic alliances or joint ventures, defensive or offensive? Sorry, defensive or offensive? Sorry? Defensive or offensive? Sorry? But is it a defensive strategy? Remember we had defensive and offensive strategies? Right, you can search it and let me know before we end. What's the term we have for licenses and franchises? We classify them in a particular category. Licenses, franchises, proprietary assets. So we see even here in global business, they are stressing the importance of a proprietary asset. And why are proprietary assets so important? In the blue, why are proprietary assets so important? Because they help to give a competitive advantage. Excellent. Why? Yes, go ahead.